Hey guys, so what I'm talking about today is expense versus profit when it comes to input and output. So let me explain. This concept for me, came out of a book by Gene Logsdon, who is kind of a philosophical how-to gardening and farming author. And he wrote this essay in a book called At Nature's Pace. And it was about a conversation he overheard in an Amish community, and it was a conversation between some Amish farmers and what the Amish call English farmers, which is non-Amish people. Uh, and the Amish people were overhearing the English farmers talking about how they couldn't make a profit, and they might have, a couple hundred cows, and they couldn't make a profit. And the Amish people said, "Oh my goodness, if I had 200 cows, I would be a millionaire." Because even with 30 cows, I'm turning a six-figure income, or some substantial profit. So the conversation centered on why that was. Why were the Amish people able to make a profit with all kind of the same economic conditions? Because they were only separated by a few miles, so it wasn't a significantly different situation. And so what they ended up doing is they created this balance sheet, and they had kind of the English perspective and the Amish perspective. And so I won't belabor it, but they were talking about things like labor. And for the labor, the English people were talking about they had to pay so much per hour and so much per week for labor. And that was an expense. So the input of the labor ended up being an expense for them. The Amish people said, well, it's a little more confusing, a little harder for me to figure out whether it's an income and expense because my labor is my children are the ones who are working the farm. So I guess I pay them with food and I may pay them a little bit, but I'm actually investing in their learning and their growth. They're becoming stronger and better at what they do and more prepared for life and more prepared to start their own farm. And it's actually one of the main goals of my life, not to make money from them, but to prepare them as a parent to be husband and parent and, to own their own farm or own their own, shop or whatever it is. So do we put our labor on the income and our expense side? And the Amish people concluded that the net effect of having their children do the labor on the farm ended up being a profit in terms of their goals for their life. Whereas the non-Amish farmers, it was just pure money out of their pocket that they had to pay. And so then they went to fertilizer. And similarly, the English were saying, "Oh my goodness, we have to pay more and more for fertilizer, and we have to bring it in and distribute it, and it's kind of destroying the land because it's a little bit toxic for the land every time we apply it, but we have to in order to get the productivity we need." And the Amish people again said, "Well, it's a little more confusing. What is our fertilizer is the manure from our cattle, um, and so it takes time to take it out of the barn and distribute over the land, but every time we apply it, rather than being a little more toxic for the land, it actually increases the fertility and depth of topsoil. So the net effect of them taking the time to apply the fertilizer to the ground had the net effect of being a benefit. So they actually had to and it cleans the barns, keeps the flies down. The net effect of that activity of fertilizing the ground for the Amish was profit. They had to identify the input was profit. And so they went down, the income and expense sheet. And each time for the Amish, the input was itself was profitable. The act of doing the thing they needed to do to get the profit or the money or the fruit of their labor in terms of maybe selling vegetables or selling milk or eggs or whatever, that ended up producing an output of profit for the farmer. But what the English people were saying was the input was an expense and the output was that they were losing money over time. And so it was a particular moment in time in American farming. I don't know how much it was duplicated, but in that particular situation, both the input was an expense and the output was an expense. So they would have to have an enormous amount. And if you ever follow the economics of American farming, we're in a place now where they have to continue to buy more and more and more land in order to turn a profit year over year. So we're getting bigger and bigger farms, and I won't explain the math on that. But for the Amish, they were focused on either intentionally or by chance finding ways where the input would produce a profit and the output would produce a profit. So the fact of tending to and caring for their farm, they were able to find ways to make it profitable. One other example was the English farmers were talking about the tractors and how expensive the tractors were getting. Well, of course, Amish people don't use tractors; they use horses. And so they said, well, my dad 3 decades ago bought a set of workhorses, a male and a female, or two females or whatever. And then out of that, we've ended up getting about 30 foals, some of whom we've sold and some of whom we've trained to be our workhorses. And then I've given some of those to my kids. So for the English farmers, the input of the cash needed to create the workhorse, which for them was a tractor, was just a pure expense. Whereas for the Amish, the workhorses were the input, but they were profitable. They produced profit by their own nature. Plus, they were friends. If you've ever, I grew up with animals. I grew up on a farm, and our horses were our friends. And the friends of, I was a child, but they were my dad's friends and my friends. So the animals, the horses in particular, um, you get the benefit almost of a pet as that's an input, but it's a profit. It becomes a very enjoyable part of the farming experience. So I'm always looking for ways that I can take any situation and figure out a way where both the input and the output are profitable, and really trying to select those situations where, the work I have to do ends up being profitable in and of itself, and the output ends up producing financial profit. So, but this is still an agricultural example, but it came to me this spring. My wife and I we used to garden when we didn't have kids early on in marriage. We had a garden for several years, and then we had one, then two, then three, then four kids. And as we had kids, that ended up absorbing more of our time. And so we haven't gardened. But this year, the kids were actually begging us to garden. They didn't know how much work it was going to be. Um, but they were like, we really want to garden. So I went and bought the seeds and tilled up a plot of land that we've used for a garden in the past and done it. And as we were doing it, I realized uh, this is the input. The benefits of having a garden, if you just look at it from food production, for the time I spend, I don't know that it's more profitable than if I was working, at 30 or $40 an hour for those same time frames and then going and buying the food. I acknowledge that. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I haven't really done the math. But this is a situation where the input is profitable. So both I personally and my family get some exercise. So that's profitable for us in terms of health. Um, I get to spend time with my family doing something that I enjoy and that they enjoy. So we have a great time out in the garden. That's not going to be true of everybody, but it is true for Gracie and I and our kids. We really enjoy just being outside together. We're getting vitamin D. We're making our land beautiful, so we get the enjoyment of the beauty of the land. Um, and there's several other factors that are enjoyable. I get the satisfaction of seeing my work immediately show up as I'm, hoeing the ground. I enjoy it, beautifying the garden and that kind of thing. So the input is profit. And then after a month and a half, a few weeks ago, we started to get the output profit, which is onions and lettuce and greens and gotten yellow squash, zucchini, um, cucumbers, and now we're starting to get tomatoes. So now we're seeing the output profit, and so now we've had profit going in and we've gotten profit going out. And I'm actively trying to find situations where I can, where I can do things in such a way where the input is profitable and the output is profitable. Instead of the input being the expense, the thing that drags me down, the thing that weighs me down or costs me money, how can I do it in such a way or find those situations in my life where I have repeated chunks of time where I'm working, but the work itself is profit. So even honestly, making these videos for me, it's fun. I like to teach. I've always liked to teach since I was a kid. Um, it's just fun for me. It's recreationally fun. It, I like doing this as much as I like playing tennis or going for a hike. So just the enjoyment of kind of mentally organizing my thoughts and then presenting it to you guys, that's not an expense. Um, I'm not necessarily looking for profit, except maybe for interaction. And as people give feedback, if they watch a video and give feedback, then I will learn from them, and then that's kind of output profit. And maybe, honestly, I know there's ways of monetizing YouTube, and down the road, maybe that would be like a financial profit somehow. But for now, this is something I've decided to spend some of my time doing. But in particular, it's because the input's great. It's fun for me. It gets me thinking and remembering concepts and becoming better equipped to use them in my own life. So that's profitable. And then the output would be interaction um, and accumulating a library of videos that if somebody asks me a particular question, I can just send them a link to a video so it could save me time. That's the kind of thing that could potentially be the profit of something like this. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Maybe you can add that to how you process things and make decisions, and look for those ways where both the work you do is profitable and then it also produces a profit when you get the result. So hope that's helpful.